Today I would like to clarify some of my understandings about touch control in any dynamic marking and on almost any piano. Of course, there are always situations in which the unexpected arises, but generally what gives a self-confidence to a performer is that the demands from oneself to play a certain section in a certain way correspond to what the performer obtains, regardless of the variables of the instrument and the acoustics and the audience and the situation of the nervous state of the person who plays. In other words, to have a certain mindset calm in order to organize the musical aspect of the architecture of the piece, of the structure of the piece, or let simply the piece speak to you. So in order to have this set of mind, what people, peace of mind, people usually is practice, technique. And that is a general term for so many things. In fact, it's not only finger memory, it's not only muscular memory, because it's repetitivity only. It's also that. But essentially, for the touch control, and specifically for the obtaining, for instance, let's take the fact that often we need to play chords that are very soft, but all the notes and together, and often in the low register. Would it be an accompaniment, or in chamber music, or in solo? And we want to make sure that the note speaks, no matter on what instrument. And I believe a lot in the knuckle to tip straight line. That means this differentiation between the weight that is given by the forearm to perform deep in the keys and quickly deep in the keys. When you play softer dynamic, because it's asked or you wish, then you will be able to perform this deep down the keys in the same speed, arriving to the depth of the keys with intensity on the tip of the fingers on the cushion part, but without the forearm giving that muscular push, which you do when you play loud. And very often by osmosis, with the situation of the atmosphere, when it's soft chord is usually a tender moment or a mysterious moment musically, it's not obviously a heroic moment, at least associated to that, then we tend to play softer, slower, depressing the keys. And therefore it's almost like saying, I'm going to caress your cheek rather than slap you, or you're going to slap you, but I'm going to caress you at the moment of the touch. And so that means that I can use the same speed of dropping deep in the keys, regardless if I play pianissimo, mezzo forte, or forte. In fact, we shouldn't depress the keys slower when we play softer dynamically. We should depress them equally fast. And in order to avoid in soft dynamics the unexpected, let's say, unevenness or accent that comes up from a key that surprises you rambunctiously, playing louder than you wished, let's say, or unevenly compared to other softer sounds. Naturally, I cannot with the camera make you feel the tip of my finger, but in fact, if I were to use the forearm, I would sound without the forearm. Oops, I just slipped. It's because I put cream on the hands with the winter. What I'm trying to say is that you enter deep in the key and the tip of the finger is applying pressure, but not the wrist. So you can practice that very precision of the tip of the finger, especially for the weaker fingers, or of course, many pianists, when they practice that, tense up the wrist in order to maintain that grip of the fingers. I would like it to be from the muscular support from the arched part of the palm, with the visible knuckles and the lower wrist. And not this, nor that. Just a very natural support here. So if I push down, well, I managed to hit myself just to prove that at the same time my wrist is free. And if my wrist is to control the hand, then I'll be having tension in the tendons from the forearm. And I want to have the security of the articulation of the fingers, support from the arch in any dynamic marking, and playing deep in the keys. Especially when it's pianissimo. Naturally, I play quick deep in the keys when it's loud, but I have to play deep inside the keys also when it's not. And if I play within inside the keys, not from above, but inside, then I play directly in the sound, not with articulation, unless I need it. As far as the very palm support, how do you practice it? Of course, you hold against a few and you play the other ones. But ultimately, you hold them all above the keys and you only push the ones that have to be displayed. And of course, the tendon being common in 4 and 5, 4 and 3, they're less uneven. Or less easily even. Or you can practice it with third finger holding and second playing 1-5 to develop independence of the articulation between the fingers. So it's more about independence of fingers whenever the display of the depth of the keys is for the touch control. And then, of course, naturally, the situation arises when one has to play octaves. Most students manage to hold the octave imprint by locking it in the forearm. I advocate the dropping of the wrist, but not only, also to practice the octave by lifting the 1 and 5 like lobsters. It's kind of funny. Without any wrist or any arm first. Then use the wrist and like suction cups, that's a swipe like a cat paw. Lock in the imprint by the edges of the keys against the ones that you want to play. Less obviously the black keys because obviously the edges are in the air compared to the white ones. And why do I insist on the wrist? Of course I demonstrate it by lifting, but I don't have to even do it as much. And the reason is because the sound is crispy, light, and also possibly rebouncing. So if I play, I can be secure in the imprint and not, of course, having a different opening every time. But the very imprint is open and closing, staying in the same position. The wrist, I don't get tired in the forearms, so I can last. Because it's easy to play octaves for a few, but if you have to play more than a few, then you get stiff. When you get stiff, the sound gets ugly, the quality of it. And if you don't do that, you start. And you lift the shoulders, and the sound gets angry instead of being generous and grand. The fact is, in the octaves, besides the wrist and the imprint of the fingers who play 1/5, 1/4, depending on the width of the hand, 1/3, the important is to manage the fingers we don't play. Let's say in the case of 1/5 is 2, 3, 4, to avoid them flopping, and of course it'll be terrible for the precision. So that's why I work a lot on the articulation, thumb included, of the dropping of the fingers on the octave, because this way I keep my other fingers above the keys. If I play low wrist, they will inevitably push. Now it depends how large the stretch is for each morphology of each hand, because obviously smaller hands stretching more, it's harder to obtain that. So I only can demonstrate with my hand, obviously, because it's only my hand. But I would say that for most of the students, if we can help them reach an imprint security of the opening of the octave while we bouncing slightly with the wrist, nothing but by detensioning the tendon. In other words, I'm relaxing the tendon, which is only tense at the very nanosecond of the moment where you play. Once you've played it, it can be relaxed. Either if you hold it, either because you're in the air, but you don't have to hold it all tense. The tension is when you don't relax the tendon, and then it doesn't get replenished by the substance that the body generates in order for you not to have a tendinitis. In other words, it's lubrified inside. But the more you stress it, the least it gets lubrified. And if you stay tense, then it doesn't replenish itself unless you take moments of break and then you go back to it until you manage little by little from a sprint to a marathon to be able to play them long, one to one, as long as you need. Precise, but without effort. The quality sound is one thing which I really insist very much on, because it's the signature of the pianist. The power of the sound is a non-existent factor, in my opinion. Most of the concert halls, not to say all, have very good modern days pianos, which are very shiny, compared to the ones that we could have seen when I was young, from before World War II, which were really eaten up by humidity and uneven and everything. I think in many aspects the modern pianos are, first of all, better kept, therefore, but also on stages of the major concert halls, but also the fact that the action is so much more even. And so in the result, the projection of the sound is more secure and also always big, especially combined to the acoustics. So there isn't such a thing as a small sound, as sometimes some people fear they do have, because in fact there isn't such a thing. There's only a precise sound, meaning the depth and the precision, but besides, what would you do if you want to think artificially to have a bigger sound and play with more tension? You only get worse, because the sound will be ugly and not louder really, and even if it is, at the expense of a tendinitis. So what's the point? It's just a question of adjusting the ear to listen. But there aren't really, I think, issues of volume. There is issues of quality of sound and of endurance. That's why when you practice the etudes by Chopin, once you manage to find how to do the opening few bars patterns, then you have to apply it through, which is exactly going from the sprint to the marathon, because it's the endurance that Chopin is working on. So the reason for which I wanted to speak about this is because one has to work also a lot on the listening quality of one's own scales, and especially the passing of the thumb. I know it's very elementary and obvious, except that we have to develop a lot the thumb's retraction under the palm. Most of the pianists squeeze the thumb in order to hold it from playing when it's under the palm, or for arpeggios. That's another factor, we'll just look at it. But to speak of the scale, I advocate practicing what I mean by there is that you play together in a package the fingers that are not thumb, let's say in C major 3 to 4, in order 4, 3, 2, and practice the retraction under the hand of the thumb, avoiding wrists, turn for accents obviously, and for evenness. That's when you realize that most of the time we squeeze the thumb with the top phalange and it just holds enough, but as a matter of fact it tenses the tendon just under, which is the one that bothers us the most. Whenever if we retract it from the right away from the phalange, which is the first one coming from the hand, that knuckle allows to immediately go much further under, and therefore you can reach a further note without to turn, in order to avoid unevennesses if you play fast. And of course that is very useful in order to promote the evenness and enhance the flexibility of the thumb's articulation outer the connection to the forearm. If not, the thumb plays horizontal often as a stick that connects, and each needs to be moved by the rest of the arm in order to move itself, and the other fingers, which are vertical, with different amount of independence according to 5-4-3-2, meaning at birth, but practiced, can be crispy articulated, but in any case will never be but horizontal finger is only the thumb, and there this four are vertical. So I think the thumb has to become a fifth, not vertical but perhaps diagonal sideways finger, and play on the, not on the top obviously, because if you play it totally vertical, inevitably you have to overlift the wrists, and then you break your palm support. It defeats the purpose of the control. So if you want to have the palm support muscularly solid from under the palm muscularly, and therefore the knuckles are visible, I would drop the thumb rather than play it horizontally. So therefore, it allows for real velocity, because the amount of meat that touches the ivory, or to speak more politely, the tip of the thumb on the key, the amount of contact should be as much skin as for the vertical cushion part of the tip of the fingers, when you play straight fingers. Of course, when you play something very lyrical or chord, you can allow yourself to play flat fingers, so that's not the question here. We speak about when the fingers face south, and for articulation, and then the thumb becomes almost a vertical finger and collaborates, and not, because of course in quick speed, and when it's velocity is the demand, of the piece, you need to play velocity and evenness. You don't want to hear where is the thumb. You don't want to even know it. So that's why I think it has to be practiced. Or for the finger to obtain that. In fact, enhancement of the development of the thumb's usage. In some aspects, of course, it has to be a horizontal finger because it allows us, for instance, in chords when it's stretched, but when it's arpeggio, we can allow ourselves to be flat, or we can use it upper, slightly straighter. And it becomes less of a burden for the forearm's tension. And now, besides the scales, the arpeggio. One can practice them on any type of chord, seventh, major. We can practice dominant. That's more for the stretch 4-3 and 3-2, but always with 5 minutes break. If not, it tendons. The stretching between 4 and 3 manages to tense too much the tendon. And in practicing, it's homeopathic. You have to be very careful not to do too much. Especially if you start practicing them for the arpeggios. Because it stretches a lot and it doesn't replenish itself right away. But once you've found with breaks, you have to plus several octaves of arpeggios. So for instance, in a triad or in a, let's say, four note chord, in this case, obviously. In slow motion, unlike the scale where you pass the thumb under the palm, well retracted, and the tip of it playing exactly in place, so that the tip of the hand doesn't move, like as if that's the bow of a violin, and the left hand of the articulation of the violin are the fingers. In the same hand, obviously. Like the violin with the coordination that is difficult. But anyway, the need for thumb passage in arpeggio is not so much to retract it under the hand because the stretch is much larger. Obviously, you don't play step motion arpeggios because it would be a scale. As soon as you do an arpeggio, it's thirds or fourth. Perhaps, or like Chopin, and retracting. Anyway. But if you want to play the thumb and reproduce it on each scale, on each octave, then you don't pass the thumb under the arm, under the palm. You pass it in slow motion, you stay in position, and you only shift fast without the accent, because you don't drop the wrist. Again, you don't play the flat thumb. So the articulation of the thumb, it's agility. Essential for the arpeggio not to be in obligation to turn the wrist in order to reach the note, because that is what gives the uneven, which you want to avoid if you want to play equal. So that's for the arpeggios. For the trills, it's very interesting to observe that every pianist has a different comfort zone according to the way his hand is capable. Of course, all our hands are more or less really capable the same way with the tendons. But it depends if it's a black key or not. Or to practice 4/5 is to obtain the independence from the joint fingers, tendon for 2 fingers. Naturally, 1 3 2 3, 1 2, 1 3, 2 4 when you skip a finger, or 3 5 rather than 4 5. Different solutions depending what are the other parts you have to play in the piece. Obviously, often you don't play just the trill unless it's depends how it comes out, of course. But it's to do a lot with the repeat of the key before it lifted fully. And if you do that the same thing, instead of but and then you slightly shake them, you should obtain a trill with quick replaying notes because you replay them before they're fully up. And because unlike the arpeggios, the trill tends to tension the tendon. Now it's interesting to say. The fact of playing it inside the escapement or replaying it right away allows for a lighter touch. Of course, it's heavier to trill in the low keys because the action of the piano is made so that the low keys are heavier to play than the top. But by practicing the precision of the replaying within the halfway lift, sometimes you have to shake. Most of the time you control, depending on how long the tune will be. Let's say Bach G minor book 1. It's an easy example of a calm trill, tri in French. Usually when you find the balance, it just lasts. But when you have a nervous trill that is more like in Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse, that you want immediately to blossom and quickly, and inevitably you tense up the hand in order to obtain that control when you don't have the time to display it in a long value. But that is, of course, to be practiced then with the capacity of the wrist to play a little bit circular, or in Schumann's Fantasy. Every time you have those trills that are short but driven compared to the Bach, which is more calm or driven, or displayed rather than driven. Brahms Concerto, and of course there's so many examples. Another aspect of technique which I would like to stress, like in Opus 10 number 9, the Chopin's Etude, is the upper rotation with a pivotal middle finger in order to pass quickly above with precision of the tips. So upper oscillation, rotation rather than sideways, which is possible but absolutely unpractical for the evenness. stretch to allow it to be easier. That's true. Chopin didn't indicate which size hand can practice his etudes. As a matter of fact, it's meant to enhance the capacity of the fingers to the hand to become stretched or retracted with flexibility and strengthen the tip. So it allows to strengthen the tip and flexibility and more flexibility on the wrists. And all of them are more or less based on that opinion of his about the piano technique. Especially with the action, when, of course, you can argue that the action of the pianos of his time were less deep than today. So today we work harder if we play the opening of the Rachmaninoff concerto. So we play a lot of deep, but so we exhaust ourselves in articulations, usually physically. Say the same thing for the finale of the B-flat minor sonata. All these fast movements that have this kind of motoric motion to obtain precision of the tips and energy from the arm, but mostly controlled by the palm, in order to allow a certain flexibility of the tendons and support for the articulation from the knuckles to the individual fingers. Just a few basses. The different aspects of the piano touch control are not so like only spare parts in a toolbox, and you say, I'm going to take the trill, repeated notes, or repeated notes with changing fingers and moving in a certain direction to allow for the movement. Same note, same finger. With the amount of liberating the tension from the tendon in order to manage it so it can last for a long time. Or the problem with the change of fingers is that it's louder. Not always. Compared to just less practical. Or then the trill. Then, especially when one of the two fingers of the trill is the thumb, again the horizontal versus the vertical of the second finger, and how to find the exact management of the weight with a slight shaking on the tip, so the thumb and the second finger have the same trigger, the same amount of weight. Then if they're two equal, almost equal length fingers, none of them is equal. 2 3 is closer, 2 4, 3 5, 4 5. No, not comfortable. 1 2. But if one of the two is the thumb, it's easier when one of the two keys is black, because then you have a higher key than the white bottom key. Then two equal white keys, and then the thumb is in disadvantage. Then you have to do 2 4, 1 3, 2 3. Also, it depends if the trill is loud, of course, naturally. If it's a soft dynamic, it's not the same. Or if it's going to be... It helps to alternate in forte or fortissimo, the trill 1 3 2 3, 1 3 2 3. Another thing to practice practice is the equalization between the two hands as a complete one hand, for instance. Because very often the hands don't play the scale all in one hand, of course in Beethoven. But in many other situations you have an interaction where you need to have the impression that you have one single hand. Practicing a scale, for instance, by the tetrachord, just without passing the thumb in this case, and just playing alternatively another key, because each equally built tetrachord creates the next, well, builds the next scale. So C major, G major, A major, D major. Very often the unevenness comes from the articulation between the two thumbs. Okay, for the thirds, let's speak of thirds. Practice. Independent articulation for the top or the bottom part. Hold and poke, staccato. Just like you would do a hold and poke for an articulated quick note. You would do practice. Hold and poke the next, then one. And then crisp. And then go back. That's for the establishment construction of the air legato. Like in Mozart 488, and you would practice. For the individual note, but if you do it by thirds, then or holding one and poking the opposite. Independence of fingers in their trigger as well as in their independence from each other. 2 against 3 like this, or 1 against 2, or perhaps these type of exercises are like in infinite variations to control 3, 4, 1, 2 and 5. Rarely do you have to play 3 against 2 in the same hand, but in case, compared to 4 or 2, compared to, I got tricked myself. And then you can add something to do with the 5th finger. It's not so much the finger itself. Of course it's brain games, and then it's how they transmit from the neurons to the tips. So it's all cognitive development of the aspect of reactivity compared to the demands of the dynamics. I still believe a lot that the articulation by itself isn't essential. Of course it is basically the thing which we need to do, which is to push the keys, but is the dynamic marking that is difficult, because then as soon as it's a dynamic marking that we're not used to play comfortably in without the unicorda, we are obliged to cheat, and then we have to practice so that everything speaks at any dynamic, from the softest to the loudest. In fact, the hold and poke is an exercise has a great advantage because it asks from the muscular memory to memorize when you lift the key, when you don't play, when you cease to depress the key before the next is depressed. So if it's legato, more or less legato, non-legato, air legato, staccato, detached, detached, non-legato, even if without to sub-nuancing so much, let's say just speak of staccato and legato, you want to know when you're supposed to leave before you play the next note in order to create the sense of continuity in every dynamic marking, but also in every tempo. Because in legato, in presto, it's hard to do staccato. It's more. But in a slow tempo, you have staccato, you have non-legato, you have air legato, you have legato. So the hold and poke is there to teach you, or you teach your muscular memory by repeating it often. When you lift the key, because when you practice, you always learn when you depress the key. But when you play it fast, often some of the fingers overstay their welcome, but uncontrollably. Especially the 3-4-4-5 because of the tendon situation. Meaning no independence of the... With 1-2, no problem. So you have to practice many times until in the performance itself, and if you want to do legato compared to staccato or non-legato, oh well, or air legato, especially in a faster tempo. Alternate it with legato. Especially in Bach. Because you have this kind of long group of 16th notes in Bach which are very crisp or can be legato. So the evenness is not just a question of when you depress the key, it's also when you lift the key before you depress the next one. And not a staccato that is squeezed by the forearm or the wrist actually. But becomes something that you control from the palm, like a sculptor. And the technique is usually always called like the technique. It's so many different aspects of technique. I didn't even speak of the pedal yet, but that's probably for another time. So far I wanted to focus on the finger precision, control, organization, and the most direct possible reaction to the demand that the score of the music asks from us, for us to demand from our orchestra musicians, from us conductor, which is all one ourselves. And of course it's all based on the helm of it on counting. And so if you can play, if I don't know, or you can play concerto, endless hemiola arpeggiated section, which is always off the beat until the end. Another thing which is very strikingly important is the shifting. Many people would make a gesture to semicircle or choreographically stating the space between the, but not precise enough and not carefully chosen color quality. That's why I always think about asking to have a prepared shifting that is faster than the piece pulse. We do this intuitively by the gesture that sort of plays in the space. But if we do the preparation, and of course if we miss it, it's terrible. But if we play it right, it's always when we prepare it ahead of time, but not play as soon as we arrive, so we can touch the key before we play it and not just land on it, because we cannot control the quality of the sound. So we have to count independently of our shifting.